Good morning. My name is Philippe Panico. I'm a first-year MBA at MIT Sloan, and I'm the student lead for Investing in the Future of Sports panel today. It's my honor to introduce our guests. We have Cole Van Nice, who is a co-founder and partner at Elysian Park Ventures. We have Matt Saunders, president of Ryerson Futures. We have Ryan Moore, founder of Accomplice. And we have George Pine, founder of Bruin Sports Capital. Our moderator today will be Saj Cherian from Kinetic, which owns Fanatics, Rue La La, and ShopRunner. Our panel will be broken down into 45 minutes of panel discussion and 15 minutes of Q&A, which would love your involvement. We'll be taking questions on Twitter through our hashtag InvestingFOS. And with that, I'll turn it over to Saj.
Thanks, Philippe. The only constant in sports is change, which creates opportunity for the smart money. What makes a great sports investment? What makes a great sport investor? Where's the future of sports heading? Today, we are fortunate to have the smart money here on stage to answer these questions and a few questions from you, the audience. So let's begin. What makes a great investor, especially in sports? George, you played offensive tackle at Brown.
I did.
Did your experience, on the field shape your interest in sports? Tell us about that.
Absolutely. I've loved sports my whole life since I was 5 years old. My dad, my granddad played in the NFL. So my dream was to play in the NFL. I never made it. My brother did. But sports has been a big part of my life, and I absolutely influenced my decision to go into the business. I always felt like I understood it. I understood it from the consumer side, and I understood it from the participant side. So I did think it gave me an advantage.
And you had a successful careers both at NASCAR and at IMG, but you only really became an investor recently. So tell us how you raised a several $100 million first fund in just 6 months.
Yeah, we sold our track record at NASCAR. From '95 to '05 was a pretty good run, and then at IMG, we did make a lot of investments. And I sat next to Teddy Forsman and worked for him for 6 years. And Ted bought and sold 39 companies. And I think really when I took the job when I was 40, and I did it because I would be working for Ted, and I thought I could learn from Ted and I could get better. And we made a lot of acquisitions at IMG, and I think I learned a great deal for him, how to assess risk and reward. And what I learned from Ted was very negative and very conservative, but when he could figure out how to structure something to minimize his risk, man, he was all in. And so, one last thing. For me, I've always been able to, I think, understand things that when we raised the money, people said, well, what are you looking for? And I never wanted to pin myself down. I've always looked at things, can you grow it? In 1995, NASCAR was called Winston Cup. It was on the Nashville network. The races were in the Southeast. I thought it could grow. I was very familiar with IMG. When I went to work there, I thought it could grow. I thought IMG College could be created and grow. And so my thing is, I like to invest in things that I think are underdeveloped, and by what we know, we can grow. So what I learned from Ted was, acquisition was an idea. And so if you have a good idea and you're able to execute on the idea, that's why I think we chose to do what we're doing.
Got it. So Ryan, you were a linebacker at Princeton.
That's right.
So does the defensive line make better sports investors than the offensive tackle guys like George over here?
No, because offensive people know what they're doing. Defense people need to react. And investment is all reacting.
No, seriously, how did playing college sports shape your interest in getting into the business side or investment side of sports?
Yeah, I kind of would pick up what George said. I think in the last 20 years, I think just the business of sports has exploded and kind of converged around technology. So I think I decided to be an investor, and then I'm watching this massive convergence to how sports, which at its essence, they become these multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar companies in these leagues, and they're very large consumers of technology. So the confluence of both things have I fell into myself as becoming, I guess, a sports investor. So I wouldn't say I started out to do sports investing. I invest in technology businesses that then are going to market, and they happen to be going to market in the sports business because those are great consumers.
Got it. So Matt, you not only played ice hockey at Northeastern, but you were also drafted by the Blackhawks.
I was, yes.
So ice hockey players better than football players in terms of investors?
I'm not sure about that one.
No, but so what experiences, kind of in your background, either on or off the ice, you feel give you that edge to make better sports investment decisions?
I think just, playing on teams, working with teams, finding out, how people work together, the discipline, the training. I mean, one of these things about, when you invest in companies, you want to make sure that team is a very hardworking, disciplined team that's focused and not, deviating from what you've invested in and what they're trying to execute on. So I think that helps a little bit, but I'm a huge sports fan and have been for a long time, not just hockey, all sports. And we were fortunate to run a program for a big media company in Canada that owns one sports franchise exclusively and has co-owns all the rest of them. So it's great to work with them. And for us, we work with very early stage companies. So we're helping with market validation and customer acquisition, and we leverage our partners to be able to test some of these solutions early on. But it's all technology solutions that we're focused on.
Got it. Now, Cole, you have been an investor for more than 2 decades. In fact, you became the CEO of a company that you had earlier invested in. So tell us about how you made that transition from being an investor to an entrepreneur and then back.
Yeah, it was probably one of the most interesting and stressful parts of my career. So I basically bought myself a $25 million problem, having been an investor in a company that was a Manhattan-based company developing computer vision technology. And there's an old saying in venture capital of too early, too early, too early, too late, right? And the idea being that if you invest in that first too early, you're almost definitely going to fail. And if you invest in that second too early, you've got a fighting chance, but you're going to have to raise an inordinate amount of capital. It's going to be really hard to buy yourself to that next phase. And where you really want to be is in that last too early before it's that fast before it's too late, right? And so there's such a timing dimension to this. And I was in a previous fund and had made an investment in a computer vision company that was in one of those really early stages, and it didn't work. The problem was, or the additional challenge was that not only had my fund put a lot of money in it, but I had some co-investors that also put a lot of money in it on the back of trust in me. And so I ended up having to jump in and run the company ultimately. And it was incredibly challenging. I think as it ties back to some of the framing questions on what makes a good investor, to me, that experience opened my eyes to the value of a really high quality investment partner. Someone who can not only work with you in the board, but outside of the boardroom and work through some really challenging aspects of pivoting companies and working through the hard times. And ultimately, the company was bought by Apple in January of last year. So it ended up being a good outcome. But it was that insight that to me gave me a different point of view, I think, on what makes a great investor, whether it's in sport or anything else, in terms of being a good partner with the entrepreneur itself. So,
got it. So let's shift to your investment theses. When making investments, especially in sports, do you bet on the jockey or do you bet on the horse? And by that I mean the entrepreneurs or the business/product, that they're pitching you. Ryan, you were first dollars into DraftKings?
That's right.
So were you betting on the team? Were you betting on the space, the concept? Tell us about that.
100%. So Jason, Matt, and Paul came in to meet me in November 2011, and I committed $1 million within an hour of the meeting, primarily because the 3 people in front of me and knew how talented they were going to be. And then the investment thesis, if you look through it, it was about the mobile phone and how you engage people within the game, the whole concept of the game within the game, because today's consumer of media is just used to interacting with it. And the first original, it was really a media play, and then we had a first revenue model that around RMG. So I would say where I bet, and we're a $200 million venture fund, which usually starts with seed investing, it's 70% or 90% the team, and then you got to believe in the market, because things will shift. They fundamentally do. Approaches, products, all those kinds of things. But if you have a group of people you really believe in and the market's there, you're going to find your way to success.
Got it. So, George, you're, in addition to Bruin Sports Capital, you're also in Courtside Ventures with Dan Gilbert and WPP. Similar philosophy, when you're going early as when you're going kind of later stage in terms of the entrepreneurs versus the products?
You know, it's funny, the balance, I would agree. When you're in courtside, where we've made 15 investments in the last year, it's on the management team. If you don't have the right management team on an early stage company, I don't think you have any chance.
Right.
And then you have to hope you're in the right, you have to believe in the segment and the idea. In Bruin, we're in much more mature businesses, so I think the segment maybe balances a little bit more. Still, at the end, if you don't believe in the management, you can't make the acquisition, but you might have a great management, but if you're in the wrong segment, you don't have a chance. So I think it's both in both cases, but I would agree it's 70 to 90% early stages on the team. In a later stage company, you could have a great team in the wrong segment. I always remember Ted Forsman used to come into me, and we would talk about a particular business, and he would say, if you hired Harry Houdini, he couldn't fix that business. And you know, it's true. So I think later stage, you have to be in the right segment and have the right management. In the early stage, if you don't have the right management, you don't have a chance.
Yeah. So how are investments in sports different than investments in other verticals? Matt, you mentioned you have a seed fund, but you're also working on an accelerator with Rogers, in Canada. Yep. Given Rogers' ownership of the Blue Jays, but also their stakes in Toronto FC, the Maple Leafs, Raptors, are you looking for? Are you helping them look for the same returns as in other verticals, or is it more strategic than financial in terms of those types of sports investments?
For us, obviously, it's return. For them, they're looking for things that are strategic to their businesses that they can help develop. They're also trying to figure out esports and other things and where that's going and how they should participate in it. So by making early bets on a bunch of companies, they get to sort of see what goes on and watch those companies, and also help take them into their arenas and introduce them to their customers and be able to trial this stuff early on. And then, continue to bet on the ones that are generating a return and solving a problem.
Yeah. So Cole, you've invested in companies as far flung as Halifax, Cleveland, Belgium. That's way off the paper route of typical VCs off Sand Hill Road, even here in Boston or in New York. I'd love to hear from you where you think the most interesting sports deals are, and what's the secret to finding them?
Yeah, that's been probably one of the more interesting patterns that we've seen in sports as sort of a bright line distinction from a lot of these other sectors that do get a lot of venture capital financing, which is that a lot of the best stuff that we're seeing is not in Silicon Valley. It's not in New York. It's not in Boston. It's in places like Saj was just saying. So I think in the last year, some of the most exciting stuff that we've done has been in Cleveland, in Kansas City, in Halifax, as he said, in Belgium, in Israel. And it's a really interesting pattern, and I think it requires a slightly different approach. You've got to be on the road a lot more and visit a lot more. And I'll give you an example for me that just, I think, catalyzed our interest in the wearable space, for example. I got on a plane about 2.5 years ago and went down to the University of Louisville to go visit the director of human performance down there, a woman by the name of Tina Murray, very progressive thought leader in the space. And I'd heard that she was doing interesting things in the sort of wearables space. And I walked down there, and as I'm walking into what they called the Performance Center, which is basically a glorified name for a great weight room, it started to downpour outside. And as I'm walking in, the entire women's lacrosse team came charging through the door. And every single one of them had a catapult on their back and a polar on the front. And she's pulling this data off. This is 2.5 years ago. Right? And she's in charge of every sport at University of Louisville except for football, right? And it's those types of conversations, I think, that have uncovered for us where some of the thought leadership is happening, and also where some of the companies are that are providing some of these technologies. They're not in the conventional VC tech markets, and I think that's a great thing for sports.
Yeah. So we talked earlier about jockeys and horses, and if you think back 60 years ago, horse racing and boxing ranked as the most popular sports, in the U.S. So I'm not going to ask you guys necessarily look 60 years ahead, but I did want to ask the panel about the sports of the future. George, at this conference, let's call it 10, 20 years from now, what sports are we going to be talking about? Same sports we're talking about today?
No, because another great example of that, 20 years ago, no one was talking about the UFC, and look what the UFC did in a relatively short amount of time. So sports reinvents itself. Even if you look at Formula One in 1985, they had a 20-year run where they reinvented themselves. So there's going to be something different going. Even in the mature business, it'll be different. I mean, today the thing everyone's talking about, of course, is esports, which has a very young demo that's very sticky and very attractive. So I think that's something to really watch going forward.
Right. So I think it was 43 million people watched the League of Legends World Championship final, and that was about 10 million more than watched the College Football Championship. Right. So I guess the question, and I'd love to ask some of the other guys, is now the time to invest in esports? You know, Ryan, you know, the Sixers, you know, for example, you're from Philly. They've invested in an esports team.
Yep.
Where do you see the you know, the opportunities in esports, and kind of getting back to kind of Cole's question about timing, right? Is now the time?
Yes and no. I mean, the whole thesis I think you had to have around sports investing is you need to tuck yourself into a pretty massive tailwind that's happening that the league or the team needs, because you want them in your corner and you want them pushing your agenda. So in the esports space, I think it's fascinating. I think it's really interesting that the publishers are now combining with owners and everything and really creating some structure around it, because I think that'll help. But then I think it needs to mainstream, and you got to figure out how esports is going to mainstream to some degree. The League of Legends stat to me speaks more to like esports comes out from the internet and streaming, and what's that going to mean to the rest of the sports world? To be honest, I mean, the 43 million is maybe a sign of popularity. To me, it's a sign of access to some degree, and I think that's a more interesting thing to think through. But on the esports thing, I think you should be looking at it. I think it's a good time to invest. It might be late to some degree, but I think it's an exciting time for sure.
Are you guys investing in esports?
We have, for sure. We don't own a team, not yet.
And where have you invested?
I invested in a marketplace concept called Gamer Sensei, which was founded by a couple of Harvard Business School guys, and their whole thing was essentially people heard of Coach Up, and which is a marketplace where you actually you're playing League of Legends, you're pretty good, you want to get better because you're a competitor and you want to play, and there's a social element to it. So Gamer Sensei takes highly ranked players, and it's a marketplace for coaching platform. So I can, I can go out on the internet and find a coach, and that coach can coach me up, and I pay them. And that's kind of that's what Gamer Sensei has launched into. And true to form, we're getting a lot of support of the publishers because they're trying to mainstream it, because people like to do things they're good at. Yeah. And people are inherently competitive, so that's the whole concept we're trying to exploit.
Yeah. Matt, are you guys looking at esports heavily?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the investments we just made, because we're trying to figure out the sport, is a company called Repable, which actually tracks the stats on 17 million players, and then they're feeding that data back to those players to help monetize their position and how they're doing. They also sell that data to the producers, who, when they're delivering new games, they can leverage some of the players to go out and start playing these. And of course, the brands are all over it because they're trying to figure out where to put their money and how to attach it to some of these. So it's sort of like an agent for those three different groups. Again, very early stage, but we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. Cole, how are you guys looking at esports?
Yeah, so we're very interested in it. We haven't made an investment yet. I think it's actually hard to invest in once you step outside of buying teams or investing in teams. But we've been spending a lot of time looking at the data and analytics space around it, both in terms of augmenting broadcast. If you look at the Twitch streams and what they do on those streams, oftentimes you compare that to what the tools and resources you have on ESPN when you see all the narratives and storytelling that's being created around a game and all the stats and metrics and analyses that they can pull to craft that narrative. It doesn't really exist yet in esports. I think that's very interesting. I also think there's this incredible element to sports betting internationally with esports, which is compelling. And I think there's a lot of interest. I think it's like $5 billion worth of gambling through skins this year on Counter-Strike alone, right? To give you a sense of the size of the market. A lot of challenges there, but I think it just sort of goes to show just how early it is in the development of that market.
We actually invested and have realized a return. We invested in a company called Beam and sold it to Microsoft. It was a company that was a live streaming product with zero latency that allowed people to watch esports as it transpired, which is kind of crazy that we've only been in business for a year and we already realized our results. So that's a good return on esports. But I would agree that the thing that, as an investor, that I watch carefully is the publishers. And there are people that have to invest in a category as a loss leader that are extremely well capitalized. And so I think you have to be very careful because for them it's life or death, and for you it's an investment. And so when you're in a space where there's somebody that has that kind of capital and it's their core business, I think you have to be very careful as to what they do and how that impacts your investment.
So I wanted to build on something that Ryan mentioned, and Ryan, you said the fact that the League of Legends, the streaming aspect of it, was really the sort of the takeaway from you from that that 43 million number. So it sounds like the sports we're watching and the way we're watching, is obviously changing. So what does that mean for the investing, piece of it? And George, on the media consumption side, since that is evolving and changing, how are the investments, for example, that you're making over at Bruin, taking advantage of that sort of shift in media consumption?
Do you want to go Ryan first or me?
I'll start with you.
So for us, my whole life, I've always wanted this. I think there are big winners when the channels of distribution in any business change. I believe the channels of distribution, I'm sure all these gentlemen would agree, that it's changing in media. And I have 4 teenagers, and let me tell you, they consume content quite differently than I do or I did when I was growing up. So media channels are changing. So we've made a substantial bet in a company called Delta Trade that was founded in Turin, Italy, because the largest tech school is in Turin, and they really provide end-to-end media solutions for FIFA, UEFA, the Premier League, the European Golf Tour, Sky, the BBC. They operate in 9 countries, and the whole idea was to invest in a technology company that's best in class as a systems integrator, and then, like everything else, create new products around that and invest capital in a growth segment. And that's probably one of our most exciting investments. We win business. I was telling someone, like, sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you're good, sometimes you're good and lucky. Delta Trade reminds me of NASCAR in 95 to 05, where you're probably smarter than you really are in terms of, we win this, we win that every other day. And it's because media is changing and the needs for best-in-class technology are more important than ever before. So, for example, in the UEFA Championships, we had 46 cameras. A consumer could choose whatever camera they want. They could pull up whatever statistics they want. They could follow the ball. They controlled the experience, and that's the future.
So I want to build on a point that Cole made about partners. You talked about how it's important for entrepreneurs to have investment partners, but let's talk about some of the broader set of partners that entrepreneurs and teams have. At the Dodgers, you have an accelerator for promising startups. Mm-hmm. How important are the partners that you recruit to work with these startups, at the accelerator? How important are they to de-risking the proposition, improving your odds of success, and maybe if there's some examples from your most recent class of startups?
Yeah, sure. So we have a very strong point of view on this. We think it's critical. I think it would be hubris to assume that, particularly in sports, that a small startup all by itself is going to disrupt the industry, just particularly given the dynamics of the industry. So when we put together the last accelerator program, one of the things we wanted to do was what we called a constellation model, where we took each one of the companies in the program and we partnered them with an external partner that shared our point of view of an industry that was aggressive, that was progressive, that was innovative. So we worked with groups like Intel and Under Armour and Fox Sports to do something with each of these program companies that would have an impact on the market. And the idea being that if we collectively succeeded in doing this thing, 2 things would happen. Number 1 is we'd pull out a lot of that conventional venture stage risk. And number 2 is if it is successful, then you've just created a line of sight on scale, right? And so when we did the last accelerator program, this was a huge part of it. And I think the interesting learning for me was that sometimes the innovations and the partnerships that you expect come from places that you absolutely would not have expected in the first place. And I'll give you one example. So 99% of what we do is tech, right? But every once in a while, something surprises you. So I was on the phone with Kevin Cully, who's the head of innovation for Under Armour. And we were having our weekly call leading up to the last accelerator class. And I was going through my usual thing, Kevin, what do you think about this tech or that tech? And he was listening to me and he said, you know what, Cole, all this is fine and good, but here's the thing. I've got something even more interesting for you, but you've got to promise not to hang up the phone. And I said, okay, what is it? And he said, laundry detergent. I said, what? And he said, laundry detergent. And I said, you got to be kidding me, right? And he's like, no, I'm dead serious. Here's the thing, that the laundry detergent industry hasn't changed in 50 years. It's the same 5 sets of chemistries that are used in every single laundry detergent system, whether it's in Dodgers Stadium or on the supermarket shelves. But sports apparel has changed profoundly, right? The athletic fabrics themselves are doing what they're supposed to do. They're wicking the sweat off the athletes. The problem is that sweat can't get taken out by the conventional detergencies, so the bacteria sits in the fabric and rots. I don't know if you ever had like an Under Armour shirt or a Nike shirt that you think is clean and you put it on and it smells. There's a reason for that, and the shirt's doing its job, the detergents aren't. And for the same reason, actually there was I think there was an article in the Wall Street Journal back in July talking about the dirty little secret of yoga pants, which is that they stink, right? And the same thing is happening with stains, right? You think about field paint. Stanford plays USC, and all the field paint that they've got on there, it gets into the jerseys, and they can't get it out. It's a big problem. So there's this tiny company in Cleveland, 7 people, that developed a new technology for detergent that exfoliates clothes. And so I said, Kevin, come on, it can't really work. And we walked them into Dodgers Stadium, and sure enough, they walked out 2 hours later with a business. We've been using the same detergents there for like 50 years, right? Every single door that got open for them, and every single pro sports team in all 4 leagues that we've opened for them, they've closed the business. So the point being, the relevance of partners as it relates to finding these sort of pockets of innovation, but even more critical, I would argue, is the collaborations that can be done with those partners. So I'd encourage folks, if you're interested, there's a 1:30 panel that's going to talk about Shot Tracker and Key Motion, which are 2 of our companies, and the collaboration they did with Intel and Fox Sports. And it'll give you a sense of sort of what can be done if small companies work together with big companies and really try and impact the market.
Well, in sports, it's hard to imagine more important partners than the teams like the Dodgers or the leagues themselves. How important have the leagues and teams been, to businesses like DraftKings, Ryan?
Critical. DraftKings, when we launched the business, we actually had a free product and we had a paid product, just at a revenue stream. And I think give a lot of credit to Major League Baseball, because the summer of 2013, we stepped up and did a partnership with them, and it legitimized it. It really helped us kind of like the leagues are behind this. They stepped into the ring with us because it was, there's some controversy around the business model. And then obviously others have followed. And I think when you get that kind of endorsement, it's critical because it just validates the brand. And so I think that's my whole point. Like, you need to really figure out what are some challenges that the leagues and the individual teams are having, and then align yourself with them, to Cole's point, to get massive acceleration, because they can roll over and destroy your business. So, in particular, Major League Baseball was a great partner for us, and so still remains it.
Friend or foe, right?
Exactly.
Got it. Well, in looking for new investments, I'm curious on how the panel here focuses your time. Are you investing in businesses built around the athletes, or the fans? So Matt, you work with the Blue Jays, for example. Where do you see greater returns, on the fan or the athlete side of the business?
Well, I think for Rogers, the owner of the team, they're looking for both sides.
Yeah.
They're trying to generate more revenue, so fan engagement, be able to do things in stadium that make sense. And then we have some companies that are looking at some technology that's tracking and sensors, things like that. So one of the companies is Push, which is doing some stuff for the 49ers right now and helping track players in the weight room and their recovery times and all kinds of data, which is very interesting because there's lots of debate around, how much data does the player want the team to have on them, and obviously the teams want a lot. So there'll be some interesting regulation, I'm sure, on that in the future. But and then on the fan engagement side, we have solutions that track when you enter the stadium. There's a platform that's attached to the team app, if you will, allows the fan to engage. So one of the companies we work with has a solution with the Fulham Football Club, where they can, when there's a penalty in the game, the fans can vote on red card, yellow card. Depending on where they're sitting in the stadium, if their season tickets are coming up for renewal, they can get moved to a lower level or better quality seat in order to incent them. They can get coupons for e-commerce stuff, that kind of thing. So it's more engagement, trying to figure out, pushing data to the fans so that if they figure out who their favorite player is, it'll send them stats, videos, real-time information about that player, and then trying to get more, obviously, money out of the fans' wallet.
Got it. You mentioned regulation. For VCs that are investing in areas like healthcare or fintech, regulation is, unfortunately, a huge fact of life. How is regulation impacting the investments in sports? Cole, how do you see the regulatory environment changing sort of the playing field for investments that you guys are looking at?
I think it's a big deal, and it comes in unexpected ways sometimes. So obviously, if you think about a sector like fantasy, it's critical. But even in areas that you wouldn't initially expect, so human performance data, and you think about, one of the challenges with investing in sports is that in some respects it's kind of a sneaky small market when you actually do the market segmentation, because if you think about it, you've got pro, you've got college, you've got high school, you've got youth. And as you sort of cut across that, you've got teams and leagues and parents and fans and athletes and coaches and so on and so forth, and all these different technologies, and figuring out that segmentation is a challenge. When you get into data, it gets even more challenging, because who's got permission to see what data, right? And so if you think about it at the pro level right now, it is unquestionable that sensors are going to be increasingly on the players. They're going to be in balls, and more data is going to be accessible off of that player. And if you think about all the things that could be done with that, not only for the player himself or herself, but for the teams and for the ownership groups and for downstream applications, it's tremendous. But who should have access to what data? And so this is sort of a regulatory thing we've come across recently that's not like regulatory in sort of the big legal framework, like fantasy sports or sports betting, for example, but it's a real sort of governor on how the physics of the sort of evolution of the market sometimes can be constrained a little bit by the need to sort of work through some of this stuff. So we've seen it there. We've seen it even in VR, right? I mean, VR was sort of a new medium that a lot of these digital media rights contracts didn't really anticipate. And so when you look at the language, like, well, how does VR fit within that media rights contract, right? So a lot of this stuff is still getting worked through, and that's part of the innovative process, right? Is the technology is moving faster than the legal framework sometimes.
Yeah.
Listen, I embrace regulation. There's in tech, how do you create a real sustainable moat? You shape the regulation, because there's money everywhere chasing things, and you can very quickly commoditize, and you can also compete with bigger businesses. If you embrace regulation and don't run from it, shape it, you can create a moat. So I don't think it's a bad thing.
And were you thinking about that moat when you invested in that space early
No,
on?
I mean, hindsight 2020,
Right.
let's call it.
Of course you did, right?
Yeah, we always knew we needed to do it. We should have invested more aggressively in it in 2020, but we knew it was going to happen. Right. And I think it's going to be like I said, it's a good thing.
So in shifting a little bit to maybe some other areas. So in New Orleans 2 weekends ago, there was a lot of talk at the NBA about augmented and virtual reality to improve both athlete performance and the fan experience. Who's excited or skeptical about AR and VR, for teams and their fans? Anyone want to take that?
I'm happy to jump on it first. So I guess background context is Flyby, the company that I ran before, was developing computer vision systems specifically for augmented reality type applications and other applications as well. And it made me realize just how hard of a problem that is to solve technically, particularly when you get into the augmented reality space. That is a really hard technology problem, and particularly if depending on the application that's involved. So I think because of that experience and living firsthand the nature of that sort of technology and engineering effort, I'm skeptical of AR. Although I've just seen something that is in a basketball context that has made me pause. And I think part of the nature of it is that if you can restrict the size of the technology problem you're trying to solve, and by restrict I mean limit the experience to a gym, to an arena, as opposed to just being out in the real world sort of writ large, the size of the technology problem gets small enough that I think it is actually solvable. So I do think that there's a line of sight on even AR becoming something interesting in sports.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
We invested in a virtual reality company called LiveLike that really allows people to communicate at the same time through live streaming, and we've been testing it out with federations in Europe, actually in our own mini accelerator program with Delta Tray and LiveLike being a courtside investment, and Delta Tray working with major federations in Europe. And we've seen some success, but it is still really early stage. As a dad of a quarterback, do I think virtual reality is kind of good in recognizing defenses? I think someday, that's a pretty good tool to teach people, probably the best tool I've ever seen in terms of if I could study a defense, what's going to happen. I think there are interesting applications, but I do think it's early days.
So you wish you had VR back when you played?
Well, I was useless, but I mean, for a real athlete, I think it might be interesting.
I think for repetition and practice, it's great, right? To be able to read defenses or be able to watch things rather than stare at a screen and watch, the plays over and over, to be immersed in them. I think that can help, although the research is out on that, but I believe it will work. Rogers in Canada has just shipped 500,000 Google cardboard glasses inside of a case of Molson beer, and when they a number of games that they're going to broadcast this year of the Maple Leafs, I think it's the Maple Leafs, so you're going to be able to use the glasses that you got in the case of beer to be virtual inside that sort of stadium, watching from home, which will be very interesting. So it's an experiment they're running.
And as you drink more,
yeah, that's right.
The glasses
Goes
You
fast.
get
It speeds
blurred.
up. Yeah.
Right. So we heard a little bit about laundry detergent, but what are the other next generation technologies that you guys are looking at? For example, someone mentioned wearables. Like Ryan, are you think there's opportunities in the hardware, or is it the software?
I think in the wearable space and the analytics space, I kind of look at application and work backward. I think as these leagues and these teams and these players become so much more valuable, and you're only seeing the contracts go so much more larger as these sports rights start to trade, and here comes Facebook and Amazon, and like I said, like the next 10 years, these athletes are so valuable, and the way the contracts work, I look at wearables and injury prevention. I think that's an incredible application, because when you're investing $150 million or whoever, you really need to understand that athlete and how you keep them on the court or the field or something like that. And that is a fascinating problem that everyone is going to have a problem or it faces, whether it transcends all leagues. And I think that's an interesting application area within even AR and wearables to some degree. So that's an area I'm spending some time in and found some interesting things. And you got to partner with the teams, because they're seeing the most cutting edge stuff.
Matt, are you seeing?
Yeah, I think of the wearable side, and everybody is trying to figure it out, and who's going to own that at the end of the game, at the end of the day. I mean, tracking all that data is phenomenal, right? They have access to all kinds of things they've never seen before, how quickly an athlete recovers after doing something, and to know not to put them in the fourth quarter if they, have heart rate, it's done certain things, and then earlier in the game, that's hugely important, which they don't have today. So I think it'll be interesting to see where it goes, and then the communication systems. I think one of the companies we're working with that pitched at the First and Future at the NFL Super Bowl. They had an accelerator program and a demo day, and they got an interesting communication system that they're testing with referees, which could be interesting. So instead of having them all huddle up from anywhere on the field, they could be communicating with each other during the play and after the play, and testing that kind of thing out, which could be interesting.
So investors like to talk about their successes and their wins, but rarely do we hear about the anti-portfolio, right? The deals that you saw and you wish you did, but you didn't pull the trigger for whatever reason. So I'm going to open this one up to the brave among us here. Give us an example of a sports business that you looked at, and in hindsight you wish you invested in, but you didn't. And any thoughts on how that may have changed the way you make investment decisions today?
Sure, I can start on that. So my kids are big gamers and like to play, and when they were in middle school, kept telling me about this thing called Twitch TV. I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't get this, whatever. Anyway, sure enough, 2 years later it was bought for $1 billion. But so now I listen to my kids a lot more and the kinds of games they play and the stuff they're into, because it's just a different world. right? They've grown up on this stuff, and it's not different to them. And learning about all the new things that come out is fascinating to see how they interact with it and the kinds of things that they pick up on.
So you bring them to the office?
That's right, absolutely.
Yeah. Any other folks?
I'm sure there's a couple. I'm just trying to think. Twitter, that's a sports property. Off the top of my head, I mean, late to Sports Engine, which NBC bought.
Right.
But I think that touches on an interesting, actually, white space area to some degree. The youth area is going to be interesting where that comes out.
Yeah. So it sounds like it all comes down to the kids, you know. So let's start paying attention to our kids and what's
Early adopters for sure.
Yeah. So before we go to questions from the audience, you know, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to sort of reflect on one piece of advice that someone gave you, you know, in your career that you can pass along to the future investors and entrepreneurs that are sitting here in the audience that are looking to start businesses or invest in businesses in sports. So maybe George, why don't we start with you?
I think the most important thing is to be with good people and have good investors. You know, I love my investors. They've been great to deal with. We have 6 wealthy families in WPP. They've been fantastic. One of the reasons we organized ourselves this way was that with wealthy families, we're longer and more patient. And so I just think whether you're working for somebody or asking someone to invest in you or having someone work with you, you're only as good as the people you're around, and you really want to be with good people that share your values. It sounds Pollyannish, but really to me, it's so important.
I was fortunate enough to be coached by the all-time winningest high school football coach in Pennsylvania, Mike Pettin Jr., who passed away last week, Michael Pettin. And in my sophomore year, he said, "Speed kills." That speed is everything. So, and in startups, it's even more important. Your ability to metabolize and move fast determines your success.
I concur. The team is everything. You know, you have to have an unbelievable team with experience, deep experience in the area that you're trying to grow. That's number one for us in anything we look at. On the entrepreneur side, having done that before as well, if some of you out there are looking at starting a business in this space, you know, building your network, getting advice from anyone and everyone that's in this space and learning quickly is hugely important. So don't ever fail to ask for advice.
Yeah, so I've got an interesting one for you. You told me you might ask this question. So I gave it some thought, and I actually had something happen to me recently that hit me like a thunderbolt when you think about this kind of advice. And it was actually it was 2 days after we sold Flyby to Apple. And I was in this like decompression mode. And I went down to Sea Isle City down on the coast of New Jersey with another family. Just went down to the beach and chilled out. And I had my 3 kids with me. So I got a 12-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And the 5-year-old's like Wreck-It Ralph, right? He's a nightmare. And he was running up the stairs, and he went into like the grandparents' room in the house and knocked over this framed piece of paper on the bedside table. And I picked it up and I read it, and it just had this like incredible impact on me, because what I was reading to me summed up exactly what I had just been through, and in many ways sums up entrepreneurship and sums up venture capital. And it was a quote from a movie. And I don't know I probably won't remember the exact quote, but I'll give you the gist of it, and you tell me if you can guess what the movie it is. I won't be able to do justice to the accent. But on the paper it said, "Life is a game of inches, and so is football." And in that game, whether it's life or football, the margin of error is so small. And if you're 1/2 step too early or too late, you won't quite make it. And if you're 1/2 second too slow or too fast, you won't quite catch it. But the inches we need are all around us, in every break of the game, every minute, and every second. We're the team that fights for that inch, right? You guys know the movie? Any Given Sunday.
I was going to say Oliver Stone.
Right? And to me, that summed it all up, right? It was the difference between Apple buying Flyby or not buying Flyby was an inch. And that inch was an accumulation of every single inch along the way that we had done as an entrepreneur. So for me, when I think about it, you know, and looking back, it's about that. Right? It's great to have the big strategies and the big vision casting sessions and brainstorms on the whiteboard and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes down to actually executing and operating, it flows right into team and speed and everything else. But it's every single inch matters.
Cool.
That's great advice. So
movie.
I've got questions here from our audience. Let's see. So there was some mention of youth sports. So one of our audience members wants to know, where do you see the greatest opportunities for investing in youth sports? So what's the next Twitch? Or
We had a lot of success at IMG, and we had a sports academy that put through 20,000 athletes a year in the summer, and we charged. We had 1,000 kids pay over $70,000 a year, and I think 98% of the kids got financial aid going to college. 60% went Division I. So I saw that business emerge. I think there's a real opening in the training of young athletes. I mean, I have a couple young athletes that are my kids, and there's nowhere to go that tells you what to eat, what to do, how to train. So and you want to tap into the market of what IMG had in IMG Academy was whatever you can do to help your kid. Everybody in the audience will help their kid get into college, make their kid healthier and smarter. And there doesn't seem to be an opening there. So I think that's an interesting place.
any other thoughts?
I agree. I agree with that. I also think there's a big opportunity in automation. So how do you, I think the step change in youth sports is going to be moving past the digitization of analog systems, but it still requires a manual process, even though it's digital, to a full step change of automated capture of data, automated capture of video, automated creation of highlights, automated data-driven recruiting, automated programming along what George was talking about. I think that's the disruption. That will be a shift in an industry cycle. That's where there will be significant wealth created and destroyed around automation. And it's a tough one, right? Particularly because of that market segmentation challenge I was talking about before, from pro to college to high school to youth. But that's what we have our eye on.
So another question from our audience. With all the opportunities that exist in sports innovation, how much traction do you look for in early stage investments? What are the proof points you're looking for? How much success do they need to demonstrate before you're saying, hey, I'm gonna back these guys? Matt?
Sure. Yeah. For us, obviously, everybody that has technology they think is the best. But for us, get it in the hands of the customers very, very early and very, very quickly, and make sure that you're building something that is solving a problem that's worth solving, that someone's actually going to pay for, or there is a path to monetization of it. Versus we see a lot of people just coming to us, hey, I built this new widget, I don't know what to do with it. Like, there's no market, there's nobody that's going to pay for it, it'll die in the vine. Versus, the ones we end up investing in are people that have experience in that space and are building something because it caused a problem for them.
I'd say half of what we do is pre-product. It's a group of people I want to be in business with, and they're credible around the market, and they're honest. They don't have all the answers, but they're great listeners, and they metabolize feedback incredibly efficiently.
And how do you determine that so early on, right? So, you said in an hour meeting,
yeah.
You made the bet on Jason and the DraftKings team.
What I liked about them, they all had 3 different superpowers. Like, you had Jason, who had that just leadership thing going. You had Paul, who understood how to scale this thing implicitly, and Matt just understood the gameplay very, very well. And the combination of it all was like, this is worth a shot.
Got it. So superheroes, basically, so you get back. Got it.
Superheroes, all right. Just ask them.
Another question from our audience. How do you build a startup ecosystem around a small, entrenched vertical like sports, and that does not have a lot of capital? Maybe for the two of you.
Sorry,
one more time.
Read that again.
How do you build a startup ecosystem around a small, entrenched vertical like sports? So it sounds like someone who's coming out of the sports area, saying there's not enough capital kind of in that. How do you build the ecosystem? Are the accelerators the answer? Two of you guys are involved in accelerators.
I think there is capital out there. It's just a matter of finding it. Building an ecosystem is different than trying to build a solution. If someone's trying to build a program in a particular area or in a particular location, you need to lock up with partners. Maybe it starts with the youth leagues and teams that are around there that you can test your solution on. Obviously, getting to some of the professional leagues where there's certainly money for this stuff. It's a combination of things, I think. And then where's the talent going to come as these teams grow and scale?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, actually. So I don't have any doubt that you can build an ecosystem of partners, right? And very high quality partners, right? Because everybody sees the opportunity that's in the industry, right? I think the capital part, that's actually an interesting question because there's not a lot of conventional venture capital for sports, right? And you go down Sandhill Road, you don't see a lot of it. And firms like Accomplice and what Ryan's doing are not the norm in terms of an intrinsic interest in sports. You might have funds that are interested in it, but they're just not doing a lot of investments in it. So I do think that's an interesting consideration, right, for the industry, particularly in this sort of conventional, Series A level check sizes. I think there's a lot of activity in sort of the seed level, and then I think as you get into the later stage opportunities, I think there's a lot of capital there. But I think that a sports-focused conventional Series A is hard.
So, another member of our audience was asking about the increasing presence of sports teams, right, in making these investments. Is that going to fundamentally change the markets, for these opportunities? I mean, obviously, we've got the Dodgers here, the Blue Jays with Rogers. Ryan, is that shifting sort of the landscape in terms of how you approach sports investments? Are you looking for the teams to kind of jump in here? Like, how's that changing the game for you?
I think it's healthy. I think traditionally leagues in sports, they're these big, massive businesses, so they've been afraid of risk. But Elysian Park and some of these real initiatives, and I think hopefully the other Major League Baseball teams will change it. I think it's a good thing because I think every startup needs a customer early on, just for feedback, not revenue. And if these leagues are really going to commit programs to taking risk and change their businesses, that's a great thing. So I'm excited about it, frankly.
I think it's a great thing because it allows, as Ryan said, the ability for the young company to test ideas and get real feedback in real time. And we work with a lot of the different teams because we want to test in courtside some of these concepts. So I think when you're an early stage company, you're looking for an advantage, and I think partnering with a team is a real advantage. At courtside, we have WPP, so we can have advertising expertise, also the knowledge of the advertisers. Gilbert has technology, hypothetically. We have sports, plus we have industry veterans on our advisory board. But when you're an early stage company, those phone calls, those relationships can be the difference between success or failure. So I think being plugged into a sports team de-risks the investment to a degree versus somebody on their own.
And I think, with all due respect to leagues or teams, they also are kind of sheep. You get a couple of them, others will follow. Getting in the club is important.
Got it. So with the amount of capital that's going in traditional markets, for example, here in the U.S. and in Canada, is it time now to start thinking about underdeveloped sports markets, China, India? Is that an area of focus for you, or how should folks here who are thinking about those markets think about the investments in those from a sports perspective?
I mean, from our point of view, we are moving in that direction. So we're building the corridor of LA, New York, now London, as sort of our next stop, and we may be running an accelerator program there. And I think that's a step in that direction. I think there's what we've seen is even if talking amongst teams that are in different countries, geographies, and sports, there's a lot of commonality. So we were spending some time with the guys over at Manchester City, outside of London, a couple of weeks ago, and just they're looking at this, trying to solve the same problems that the Dodgers are trying to solve, and interested in the same markets that we're talking about up here. And so I think that pattern exists internationally, and so I think some of these emerging businesses and technologies can solve problems on a much bigger scale than what you see just in the States.
Amazing opportunity. I mean, if you're a league and you're trying to grow aggressively, you need to expand. And sports, by their nature, are global to some degree. And I think that, to my earlier point on getting into an interesting tailwind that's important for the league, that's a ripe opportunity. And how you think about how sports and rights and what would be played out in different countries and different regions that have these kind of large populations, I think it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, in India in particular, we run a couple of accelerator programs, mostly in financial services in India, but that market is just phenomenal. And the adoption of technology, I would say, is much easier to sell there. And mass population. I mean, there's 1.2 billion people. 50% of the population is below age 25. There's 300 million smartphones. So to be able to tap into that is huge. And I think with cricket and other sports there that are prevalent, I think there's a huge opportunity to tap into that for technologies here that are proven and want to go into other markets.
I might be the old grumpy guy on the panel, having been at IMG for 9 years and done business in China, India, and Brazil. They are tricky markets, and there are unique market dynamics in those markets that make what appear to be great ideas a lot more difficult than one might realize. For example, in China, sports, it's a communist country, it reports into the Minister of Propaganda, as an example. So it's a little, on the surface, it looks great, but when you get in there, it presents unique challenges. So I think partnering with the right people on the ground in those markets is critical to success, so that you understand the culture and customs that accompany doing business in those markets. And I think that's why those markets aren't growing at the pace they could be, right? And I think it's one of the great things about America is that we do have a rule of law and customs traditions that are admirable. Not that other people don't, but I think we're a little more advanced than some of the other countries that are developing.
So between China and India, are you more bullish on one for sports?
Well, certainly in India, probably, at least in India, cricket is an enormous. At IMG, we had 2020 cricket, which was enormously successful. One of the sports we might be talking about 20 years from now could be kabaddi, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think India has an enormous potential, probably a little bit more culturally, right? In China, sport is kind of new. So we sit there and say, hey, we love sports, but culturally in China, sports is still kind of new. Mm-hmm. And so it's not as ingrained as it might be in America. So that's another challenge in some of these other markets. So
that's also an opportunity.
That's
right?
An opportunity, but it's not, the passion's not there. It's
not there yet.
Right? So we look at this panel. You got 3 former athletes and investors invest in sports. It's not quite as mature, so it could be the opportunity, but it's not as ingrained as it might be in other parts of the world.
Got it. So I think we have time for one more question. One of the students wanted to better understand how you evaluate opportunities in the stadium versus the home, right? And so, what's the future of the stadium experience? So maybe Cole, starting with you, how are the Dodgers thinking about those two very different experiences?
Yeah, very different. So there's obviously a lot more to do outside of the stadium than in the stadium, but the innovations that do happen in the stadium are pretty profound. So we invested in a company called Appetize, which was based in Santa Monica. Invested in them about 3 years ago, and they're in a little CrossFit gym space in LA, and their whole thing was a next generation point of sale. So how can we reduce wait times in lines? How can we have a better customer experience in the stadiums? And so they used the Dodgers as a test bed for that, and they've quickly scaled. I think they'll probably do north of $30 million in revenue 3 years later, just innovating across stadiums across the country. And the interesting thing there is that if you look at the original infrastructure, things like NCR Quest, right, stands for National Cash Register, right, and Oracle Micros and so forth. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to innovate there, but I don't think it's quite as scalable as what you can find outside.
I think one of the challenges, we had a big debate when we started Courtside about one of the mission statements, and I wanted to be investing in markets that were not capped. So those were ones that really tapped into the passion of a sports fan. When you invest in a market that's capped by somebody, in the end, that somebody's probably going to get your margin. And so as you're thinking about your investment, it's hard if you're in an investment where your margin, when you're successful, gets reduced because you're a success. I mean, having been at IMG, when you had a great client, your reward was either a reduced commission or you were fired and it was taken in-house. So when you're an investor or you're coming up with a product, you have to make sure that that marketplace is not limited by forces that will restrict your success. And so we had a good go around with our CEOs on what we go after, because I think that's an important element.
Yeah, great. Well, look, I think we're out of time here, so I want to thank our panel, George, Ryan, Matt, and Cole. And I want to thank you, the audience. Hope you learned something about something here today that's going to make you a smarter investor, a smarter entrepreneur. So please join me in thanking our panel.
Well done.
Thank you.